Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing well. Welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a wildcard 6 draft video. I am definitely going to activate the wildcard this game week. However, I haven't actually pressed the chip button yet. I will be making transfers tonight, and that's to capture some of the price rises available. You can actually have a look at some of the price rises on Fantasy Football Hub. Just looking at the price changes tool, you can find the link in bio as well as a link towards Fantasy Football Hub. But the key reason why I'm mentioning that is simply because if I activate the wildcard chip at the end of the deadline, so let's say before the deadline, then what I can do is make transfers during the week and take hits right now, which will actually help push the sort of price change algorithm to force price rises and falls for some key players on wildcard 6. This way, my moves are actually helping to sort of support the demand and supply. On top of that, I will then just ultimately wildcard before the end of the deadline, and that will wipe away all the hits that I do over this game week. So that's my plan right now, but I'm definitely going to wildcard. So my first draft, I think, is worth discussing quickly all the different areas on the pitch and the different variations. So we'll start with defense, then midfield, then attack. As of right now, too, I clearly did sort of dead end my team into a game week 6 by going for Salah 2 free transfers, and I've taken myself out of Saka. What I will probably do from game week 6, though, is actually drop Salah. And you'll see that later within my draft. So quickly having a look at my defense here. I think the key point in defense, once again, like many other previous wildcard drafts that I've posted for people who've wildcarded in the past and wanted these sort of suggestions, was once again what to do with someone like Rico Lewis. I think one sad thing is that I won't get the information necessarily of him versus Arsenal. A lot of Man City predictors actually have Lewis maybe starting versus Arsenal, but some of the best that I know, including Luke, who I think is an absolute wonderful follow that you'll find on Twitter, he's actually someone who doesn't think Lewis will start versus Arsenal, and I'll be curious to find out whether that's the case, because of course, obviously there are some games where Lewis does struggle, and you can see him be a sub off, right? For example, like in the Brentford game when they went man for man, that sort of thing, and maybe that has knock-on impacts on tougher games. But for the most part, I kind of see Lewis as a player very much like Zinchenko last season, where in some of the easier fixtures for Man City, I think he's actually close to being nailed right now, just given how unique he is as a player and within the system. So those are my thoughts. In terms of the other defenders, I think the argument once again holds if you want to go into double City defense, whether you go into an Akanji or Guardiola. I think these are the two other defenders that I would say are quite close to being nailed. We always know that being nailed as a City defender, unless you're Ederson, doesn't really mean much. So you're going to have to expect occasional benchings at times for these City defenders, and I think I'm okay with that going forwards. Another thing to mention too is ultimately this is one game away from Liverpool's sort of end of their, I think, true run, right? In terms of game week 6 is actually a really good window for Liverpool, but trying to project ahead, I do think that this is the time where it makes sense to maybe forego some of the Liverpool assets, unless let's say you're really confident in someone like Konate and he's at a very unique price point where, you know, ultimately he's at just a really good value point, and I think he can definitely sit within a wild card. But how many options can I go for within my team that are a bit dicey in terms of minutes? Potentially is what I'm dealing with here. So no Konate for now, but I think he's, out of all the Liverpool defenders, one that I'm the most interested in. Amazing assist, by the way, also within the match versus Bournemouth today. Dunk and Gabriel are players that I find to be quite locked into the wild card. I think that Brighton defense is really good value, so therefore Dunk stays. I can't really see him losing minutes to someone like Webster in the future. I might be wrong, but we'll find out, I guess, tomorrow. On top of that, Gabriel, just someone who ultimately is the best value Arsenal defender, in the sense that he is just an insane set piece threat. We've seen that time and time again with his underlying stats, and I think he does belong within a wildcard 6 draft easily. And actually the double up is definitely there with Raya. But one of the key things in terms of defense that I think is worth mentioning is when we're talking about defense, you want to actually deal with whether or not you want to double up on Arsenal defense. So you have an opportunity here to actually go Gabriel plus Raya, I would say, or maybe even if you want to go for another defender, that's fine. But you have an opportunity to maybe actually go Havertz plus Saka, for example, on Game Week 6 wildcard. And that can change the draft around a lot. But it also means that you're going to drop someone like maybe Gabriel or drop someone like Raya if you prefer another goalkeeping pairing. And that's, I think, the lay of the land right now in terms of the wildcard 6. So it really does depend on how you want to play around triple Arsenal. I personally would like to triple up on Arsenal by going for Saka plus Raya plus Gabriel, simply because I think there are enough players right now within the forward and midfield positions that I actually like within the medium to long term that allows me to sort of not have Havertz within my draft. I think Havertz and Saka, of course, there's so much value here in game week 6 and 7, but then actually as a sort of more permanent pick, I do find that Havertz maybe later down the line becomes a transfer towards someone like Dominic Solanke, which probably also holds the same for some of the other forwards you'll see later down in this draft. So that's the sort of discussions that I think are quite useful for defense. In terms of the 4.0 defenders, another argument here within the wildcard is actually dealing with what is the best 4.0. We just saw that Mosquera was actually stretchered off today. So I think that the best 4.0 defender is probably going to be Greaves from Ipswich. But if you want to take the upside potentially and take a little bit of risk, there is Van den Berg. One of the issues with Van den Berg, though, is he does occupy triple Brentford. However, I think by not going Flecken in the draft and by also not going for maybe someone like Pinnock, you can actually allow yourself to just simply go for Van den Berg here, and it doesn't really occupy too much of the triple up of Brentford that could happen later down the line. So Mbeumo is definitely someone who's absolutely locked, but we saw that Sade was actually benched today for game week 6, and I think it's very possible that we could see Sade not having perfect minutes going forwards, which means that Sade isn't going to feature within this draft or as a transfer for myself later down the line. So that's why I think Van den Berg is actually the sort of interesting 4.0 here, where you can take a bit of a risk and potentially have a nailed Brentford player. My concern, though, is I still think that Collins actually plays ahead of him in a back four. And for most of the games where you're actually wanting to play Brentford defenders, you're going to actually want to have not Van den Berg, because I'm not expecting that he starts for now. However, if I'm wrong about that and I go for Van den Berg, there's an opportunity to get a little bit of upside there. So I think those are the kind of discussions in terms of defense that I find quite interesting. You might also want to consider, once again, the likes of Pedro Porro. On top of that, once again, still going for a Liverpool pick if you really want to do so. But I think that's the lay of the land. In terms of goalkeepers, I do think Raya is a very clear play for myself. But the opportunity to go Flecken and Verbruggen is still there as a 5.0 pairing. And if you want to go for a 4.5 at the end of the day, I think Flecken is still, or Verbruggen rather, is also a very, very good pick. And those are my thoughts right now in terms of goalkeeper. So that's the sort of defensive landscape. I do think that another element to sort of discuss about is also whether you want a Chelsea defender. I think Colwill clearly is a very, very good pick too. Maybe a Man United defender seems interesting as well. They actually had a pretty good performance versus Crystal Palace, all things being considered. Dalot is my favorite pick out of the bunch. So those are the kind of teams that on a Game Week 6 wildcard, they're not necessarily perfect, but they definitely are very good 4.5 or even 5.0 options that you can definitely consider within the drafts yourself if it kind of fits your prerogative, right? If you don't want double city defense, for example, there's an opportunity here to actually go for a Chelsea defender, maybe a Brentford defender, maybe a United defender. So that's what I think is actually quite nice about this wildcard window. But my defense within my draft is actually going to be Raya, plus a 4.0 goalkeeper. So for now, I'm just going to keep Bentley. And then in defense, I'll be going with Lewis, Greaves, Guardiol, Dunk, and Gabriel. Greaves just simply as a bench option. Dunk is someone who plays permanently. Gabriel and Guardiol mostly for most games. And I think Lewis, because I do think that there's an opportunity to sort of punt into double city defense. Now, there is a huge asset in the game that I think a lot of us haven't really talked about so far because of, unfortunately, due to the illness that he suffered, and also with, let's say, the sort of change in the system for Man City. And we'll jump into that within the midfield segment right now. But in the midfield, I think what's tricky about the landscape for the midfielders is you do want to consider whether you want to go for one of the spicy punts within the game, which would be Foden or even Savio. Savio right now seems like his minutes are very, very good for the right wing position. We have seen Savio for Foden as a 45-minute substitution a couple times. And what that usually means is that whilst Foden and Bernardo Silva are on the pitch, you tend to see actually when Savio comes off for Foden, that maybe Foden is actually the one who goes inside, and that Bernardo Silva is the one who actually plays out wide for around 45 minutes, if that's the case. Or if, let's say, we're just discussing with the Man City sort of minutes right now, I mean, if someone like Savio gets to play most of the minutes, which I think because he's first choice, he will, and Bob is injured in that sort of right wing position, then there's a lot of minutes to be gained for someone like Savio. What is concerning, I think, is that KDB is actually fine, which means that KDB, Gundo, Foden, Bernardo are all occupying central minutes, which also means that there's going to be that natural substitution of, let's say, Savio coming off for Foden in the future, or even, let's say, maybe for Bernardo technically, which allows for another sort of central player to play within the pockets, right, within the center. And that means that someone like Bernardo can go out wide. So that's my main concern with someone like Savio for now. As far as Foden, I think the Arsenal game is going to be a really good indication of how good his minutes will be, but I still don't have the confidence levels that his minutes are going to be perfect for now, just because KDB still seems to be fine. Gundo is already regaining his match fitness, has looked good as a substitute. We've seen Pep as well talk about how well Gundo has played so far in terms of him being really good within central positions. And Bernardo, generally speaking, I mean, he's going to take minutes no matter what, right? Whatever position he plays on the pitch, for the most part, because he's so flexible, he's going to occupy City minutes. And so that's why I think that I'm a little bit lower on going for Foden and Savio for now. But I do recognize that by going for double City defense here, I'm actually blocking my opportunity to maybe go for Foden and even, let's say, maybe a Savio down the line, or even starting with a wild card there. And that is something that I'm considering right now, but I feel like to create a little bit of a stronger, more robust draft, I've decided not to go for these players. Maybe the option is maybe to, let's say, forego someone like Guardiola, leave that Man City spot open, and then actually get another defender within the team that can sit well. But I'm pretty comfortable right now with the defense that I have, which is also why that I have a certain midfield. So the midfield that I actually have is Saka, Palmer, Mbeumo, Rodgers, and Semenyo. The key reason I would say is that there's a lot of choice within the Game Week 6 wildcard, but I think two options I would say are fairly nailed on. And the two options for me would be Saka and Mbeumo. I think all the other picks here are a little bit more optional, and we can discuss the optionality of those picks right now. The reason why I'm going for, let's say, Saka and Mbeumo, and I think they're absolutely essential, is because Mbeumo just is probably the most price efficient player in the game. I think he's insane value for money. We knew that as soon as Tony left, and now the fixtures for Brentford are absolutely there. For Saka, he is probably my captaincy option, particularly since this draft doesn't have Salah. I need someone like Saka in Game Week 6. I need someone like Saka in Game Week 7, and that's a good coverage of the captaincies. Palmer also offers the exact same here. What I didn't love so much about Palmer versus West Ham is I know he was getting, getting kicked all over the place, and the substitute made sense, but he's out of the Conference League squad. They only have a midweek match in the EFL Cup. I do find it a little bit weird that Palmer only played 63 minutes in Game Week 6. And this also applies to Jackson, unfortunately, where I think we're naturally just going to see substitutes for him over the course of the season, with Nkunku being really good, or good enough to at least take minutes away from him. But yeah, I'm still generally comfortable but I'm still generally comfortable on Palmer, hoping that we don't see something like a 63-minute sub. That's the only thing that I think I'm thinking at and sort of scoffing at, because I don't think that that's exactly the minutes that I would expected for Palmer, even in a game where they were blowing away their opponents. I completely get that the result was sort of pretty one-sided and that Chelsea just have a world-class substitution pattern in place, but the reality is that it's there, and that actually has a little bit of a negative consequence on Palmer's minutes overall. And I think that's sort of one thing that I'm thinking about in terms of the midfield. As far as Rodgers and Semenyo, I think Rodgers' minutes so far have been incredible. And it's quite ironic that it's taken 2 assists for him to actually make me feel that he's once again a lock for this Game Week 6 wildcard. But ultimately, I find it so fascinating that Rodgers is someone who, in spite of Duran playing so well, Ramsey playing well within some games, Bailey generally, very promising as a player, McGinn also a captain of the team, that Rodgers is the one who has the best minutes within this Aston Villa team. And I think it just shows you how well regarded he is by Unai Emery, which is why I have him within my draft. With Semenyo, I think it's the exact same thing. He's even more of a talisman of the team, in the sense that I really struggle to believe that for a team like Bournemouth, who aren't engaged in multiple competitions, that Semenyo isn't the one who's going to get 89, 95 minutes a game. Ultimately, that's where I think Semenyo belongs, and I think there's a lack of depth clearly within the right wing position for Bournemouth, which makes Semenyo so interesting. He was also once again brilliant versus Liverpool, and pretty unfortunate not to score. So Semenyo is someone that I find to be such an easy lock on the Game Week 6 wildcard, simply because Game Week 6 and 7 are very much like the Arsenal games, because they're literally the Arsenal games but flipped. So that's why Semenyo is within this draft here. In terms of the other picks, though, unfortunately, I feel like the Sade benching has taken that away from the potential optionality of the wild card. There's obviously McNeil as well in those 5.x points, and a lot of people are going to be looking at someone like Smith Rowe, who's absolutely leading and paving the way for the midfielders in that price bracket, and saying that they want to go for Smith Rowe. But ultimately, I think FPL is a game of planning and also sort of planning ahead specifically, and Smith Rowe has done incredible for the run of games that we thought he would be brilliant for, but now I think the run of games is definitely a lot worse than what Fulham's fixtures were between Game Weeks 1 to 5. So taking that into account, I think I'm no longer interested in Smith Rowe. With Amad Diallo, he's actually quite interesting as well as another pick, because We saw Rashford get benched, and Ahmad's been brilliant all season long. But my main concern really with Ahmad is that I still think that Rashford will find a way easily into the side. And with players like Højlund coming back into the team, I think it's less likely that Ahmad's minutes will actually get better as we go along down the game weeks. I tend to think that they'll actually get worse now that Højlund is close to coming back to match fitness. So that's my main concern with definitely Højlund coming back onto the field versus Crystal Palace. So that's why I'm a little bit cold on someone like Amad Diallo. Someone like Bruno, I still think is very relevant for the wildcard. And I think a lot of people are going to laugh at the idea of me going for Bruno or considering Bruno for the wildcard. I think right now I'm actually considering between both Bruno and Palmer, because ultimately Palmer actually has, let's say, a poor game week 8, a poor game week 11, whereas Bruno's run of games is generally speaking very, very solid, very, very above average. Some people might actually want to wait until game week 8 to go in for Bruno, but even as soon as game week 6, I think he's actually a very good option, right? He's actually got Tottenham at home, which is a pretty decent game. Generally speaking, Bruno is the type of pick you can hold for a long, long time. And to be honest, I've held him for 5 game weeks now, and I've been immensely frustrated in terms of the outcomes, in terms of points. But from what I'm seeing on the pitch, in terms of the chances that he's getting, or even the chances that he's creating, he's still that option for me. Now, it doesn't seem like we're actually getting too many penalties in the Premier League, right? These kind of bogus handball penalties clearly don't exist so much compared to in previous seasons, or even just ridiculous penalties in general. But I don't think that that takes away too much of the value from Bruno. If you look at, for example, the Crystal Palace game and the United game, I would say Bruno and Eze were still fantastic in open play. And these are players that we usually say that we go for because they have penalties, but actually they also deliver a lot on the field that make me suggest, or make me think at least, that they're still very, very good picks. And so Eze is once again one of those picks on the Game Week 6 wildcard that we can definitely consider as well. But I think it does depend ultimately on the Mateta minutes as well, because that sort of has a knock-on impact on how much penalty share I guess he has per game. So it's a bit of a murky landscape. I know some people will also really want to go for Luis Diaz because he's just been incredible so far. And it's going to be harder and harder for Slot to, let's say, continue benching someone like Gakpo instead. We've actually started to see, for example, let's say Chiesa within the middle and Gakpo as a bit of a left winger. So it does seem like Gakpo is almost set in stone as a left wing substitute, which is nice for Diaz in the sense that I think he's only really competing with one person, but it does seem like that is the position where the performances from the left wingers have both been really good so far. So it is a bit of a tough landscape to sort of navigate, considering that Luis Diaz's fixtures are getting a little bit worse. And that's pretty much it, I think, for the midfield for now. I know there are other picks like maybe Tielemans, like even McNeil as well, that I probably have mentioned, but they really don't infuse me in FPL. Those are probably some of the most boring picks that I find that FPL offers. I do like watching my players play football and probably not watching them take set pieces. So that's my thoughts right now on the team. And that's why my midfield is exactly what it is, which is Saka, Palmer, Mbeumo, Rodgers, Semenyo. Now, moving on towards the forwards now. There is definitely an argument to say that you can drop Haaland. And if you drop Haaland, it probably actually means that you go straight back into someone like Salah and you kind of go for a wildcard 3 type team that I sort of suggested. But look, I would like to keep Haaland. I think he just looks incredible. Watching Salah versus Bournemouth was a little bit unenthusing, I would say the least. I mean, he had lots of chances, had great touches, but was the sort of incision there in terms of getting 2 goals off of good chances and good opportunities? Not really. Whereas Haaland, once again, going back to the preseason discussions that we had, I sort of felt like it made more sense to back the player who is of prime age, who is younger, who is someone that I have a bit more confidence in terms of the minutes when the fixtures get rough between games. Now, Haaland has an injury history as well, but yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with keeping Haaland on the wild card, and that's that. What I do find to be quite interesting is who pairs alongside Haaland the best. And right now, we actually saw, at the time of my recording, that Brighton actually posted a tweet of João Pedro actually being ready, or João Pedro being in training. So I think it very much means that I'm not going to get my Consa auto sub points today, but it means that João Pedro's fine. And I think João Pedro is still someone that I would go for because I think that he is the best value priced player in the game. And yes, of course, the Brighton fixture run is much worse, but I'm clearly going for a wildcard here that has much more rotational depth, and I can bench him for the poor fixtures. And that's my thoughts, and that's my general approach for João Pedro for now, given that I don't have Salah within my team. I also plan to actually go for Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And part of the reason why I'm going for Dominic Calvert-Lewin is that I do think that Havertz is really interesting. I do think that Solanke is really interesting. But by going triple Arsenal the way that I have, I don't really go Havertz. And by, let's say, going for Dominic Calvert-Lewin and Palmer instead, I'm basically dropping off the optional, I guess, the alternative to that, which would be something like Bruno plus Solanke, which I also find to be quite interesting. So I'm quite intrigued at trying to understand what the minutes are going to be like for someone like Solanke going forwards, and what the pen share is for Solanke. Because I feel like part of the potential value of Solanke is if he's on penalties for Spurs. Without actually knowing that he's on penalties for Spurs, my genuine guess is that I don't think he's on penalties and that Son will take penalties. But that's why I've dropped Solanke here, and I've actually gone for Palmer and Calvert-Lewin instead. In a way, it's nice because I get 2 penalty takers here, as opposed to maybe within the Solanke and Bruno sort of draft in a different world where I actually maybe only have 1 out of 2, despite trying to go for 2, with Solanke probably not be on penalties. So that's why I've gone for Calvert-Lewin. One thing that's been the most interesting for me that I love about Calvert-Lewin so far is that his minutes have just become insane. We know that Everton were knocked out midweek as well within one of the cup competitions, which means that, you know, Beto has to play his minutes somewhere. But clearly, I think Sean Dyche is very happy playing Dominic Calvert-Lewin for more than 85 minutes a game. And we can finally say that we've reached a point where I would say that Dominic Calvert-Lewin's minutes and his fitness is up to scratch. And this run of games for Everton is really just that good. So that's why I'm going for Calvert-Lewin within this draft here. So as things stand, the draft I have is going to leave me with 0.4 in the bank, but this might change obviously by tomorrow. I'm trying to capture some price rises, as I mentioned, but I'm going with Raya plus a 4.0 goalkeeper. In defense, once again, Lewis, Greaves, Guardiola, Dunk, Gabriel. In the midfield, Saka, Palmer, Mbeumo, Rogers, Semenyo. And then in the forward line, I'm going with Haaland, Calvert-Lewin, and João Pedro. I think what's important about Game Week 6 draft wildcards is that we do need to think about how long we're planning ahead for. I think within a few game weeks time, Liverpool's fixtures get a little bit better at around game week 10, and City's fixtures get a little bit worse once again. So that's another opportunity to revisit, maybe moving off of Haaland and then moving into Salah for sure. It's also another opportunity to revisit someone like Dominic Solanke, who I have dropped off of this wildcard draft for now, and even someone like Pedro Porro, who doesn't appear on this draft wildcard. So that's what I'm thinking about right now in terms of approaching Spurs and approaching Man City. Clearly, there's no best way to go around all the players in FPL. We have a budget in place. This is my wildcard draft and my first wildcard draft, and I'm sure that it could change a little bit over the course of the week, which I will sort of reveal within my final team selection. But that's it in terms of my first Game Week 6 draft wildcard. I also have a very special video later down the week with another very special guest and his wildcard draft later this week. So look forward to that on Tuesday morning. But otherwise, take care and goodbye, and I'll see you guys soon.